All right, I have finally broken down and decided to do a new and improved, revised how to play deep sea monsters. And much to the... All right, if you guys have been on my cast, if you guys know my thoughts lately on this deck, you know this is not an easy decision for me to actually make a deck guide on this. I despise this deck, similar to how I despised, Bannerman when it was like just cancerous back before patch 1.2, back before Rising Tides, when basically everybody played it. We ended up with a bunch of mirror matches. Obviously, it's one of the, if not the most played deck right now in Runeterra, especially in the competitive scene. We saw it a ton in Duels of Runeterra 10 when we were casting day 1 and day 2. Lots of mirror matches as well. So, as always, my name is Justin, also known as Shit Just Works, and today we are giving in to the deep sea monster madness. So if you don't know what this madness is all about and you're looking for a guide or just some help on kind of how to play sea monsters, what it's all about, you're in the right spot. As always, we're going to go through the deck list, talk about some of the cards, and then get into 2 games. All right, so one thing I do want to point out with the deep sea monsters, there is one saving grace here above, let's say Bannerman of old, and that is that this deck can be made a lot of different ways. It's kind of evolved since the last format as well, since patch 1.2 came out. It wasn't nearly as fast before 1.2 came out. Now we have like the 3 Dreg Dredgers and the 3 Dreadisons just go all out on, okay, we're going deep like ASAP, right? And then there's a lot of other minor changes that you can make that maintain the deep sea monster strategy, but are kind of like choices that are to that person playing the deck. So you can very much make it your version of deep sea monsters. So this definitely has a one-up on Bannerman in regards to that. So with that said, let's get into why these cards are in here. So like I just mentioned, Dreg Dredgers and Jettison, as well as Thorny Toad, Jesus, and Dead Bloom Wanderer. Gonna slow down there for a second, get my words right. All right, so all of those cards are the entire low end of the deep sea monster toss support. It's every card you could play. The only other card would be, if I could find it here, Lure of the Depths, right? So we're not going to add that card to the deck. Lure of the Depths is a very much debated card in regards to whether or not it should be in this deck. I personally do not like it. My thought process is you're already reducing everything by a crap ton with Nautilus, and you don't need the additional, cost reduction. Sure, it gets you deep a little bit faster because you're drawing one. I don't know. I'm not a fan of it. It's not in the deck. Beyond that, we have typical sea monsters. We got 3 Devourer, which is pretty much in every sea monster deck. You have to have 3. 3 Abyssal Eye, same deal. Anything elusive that draws you cards tends to be pretty decent in this game. And usually there's at least one Shipwreck Hoarder. Lately, everybody has been adding a Terror of the Tides just for how beefy it is. It's a super big swing unit. You play this late in the game, and it will completely turn the tides. See what I did there? Of the battle. And God, the puns with this game. So it's just overall a really good big sea monster. The overall strategy, as usual, is to just get deep, get late in the game, attack with big dudes. And a recent addition to this is Atrocity. Atrocity on a Nautilus feels okay. 13 damage. I'll take it. Yes, please. Additionally is Mist's Call. Mist's Call is a card that has seen a lot more play in this deck. I love it. I do think 3 is a bit much. It can clunk up your hand. But getting a Mist's Call early on a Dead Bloom Wanderer against something like an aggro deck, or a Mist's Call on something later on like a freaking Nautilus seems pretty good, right? This deck does not play Thresh. That's just a personal, opinion of mine. I think it feels so bad getting Thresh onto a Maokai. You always want it on a Nautilus. So I just go all out on the 3 Maokai, get a little bit more of a chance to go deep faster, and the 3 Nautilus because you always play 3 Nautilus in these decks. So I hope that gave you guys a pretty good overview of the deck. There's actually going to be a link to the deck below on Mobalytics, as well as a deck code if you guys want to check it out. But without further ado, let's get into the 2 games. All right, hold up. Before we get into the gameplay, as always, do not forget to subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you do enjoy the content, like this video if you like the video. And if you watch to the end, maybe I agree that I'll go get a haircut because I need a haircut really bad. Actually, I'll probably still put it off, so that's a lie. I can't promise that. But what I can promise is that I do want your guys' feedback, so wait till the end of the video. I got some questions for you. I definitely want to know what you guys think and get your feedback in the comments below. But into the next game. All right, so both games here kind of interesting. It's a They Who Endure matchup as the second game. This first one is a Misfortune Sejuani deck, which I personally like. It's not a super highly played deck yet, but I do think it's going to become extremely popular in the future. It's very aggressive. So you can see here, this is actually a good example of how to stave off the aggression of a sort of aggro deck. Our hand right now as well is not meant to stave off an aggro deck right now. We don't have Dreg Dredgers. We don't have Jettison. So I do think this is a pretty good example of how to kind of make it through the early turns of the game, even when you're not drawing your lower cost units. We also don't have any Dead Bloom Wanderers here. And it is Dead Bloom, not Dread Bloom. I don't know why everybody continues to say Dread Bloom. I don't know. Just force of habit, I guess. Maybe from some other card games. But you do get Maokai. So one thing about Maokai is if you draw him early on and you're not really finding any other units or toss mechanics, yes, you absolutely have to play him. He's going to get you saplings to defend. He's going to get you additional toss 2 every turn. Hopefully, if your opponent will allow it, if it is able to stick. Usually 4 health is pretty difficult to get rid of, so it will stick for a turn or two 9 times out of 10. Obviously, stuff like Hired Gun on my opponent's side is a way for them to kind of pick it out and nab it and kill it. He actually already played the Hired Gun on something else, so I am safe for now. I imagine this opponent's probably playing 2 more in the type of deck that he is playing. Right now is a very scary field. All right, my opponent's super wide. Jaw Hunters is one way to kind of get back into this, and again, the Maokai. So you can already see the value that this Maokai is providing in these saplings. It's allowing me to pick off units and trade a little bit more favorably with my opponent. And that's exactly what Jaw Hunters does as well. So, for example, my opponent is playing Misfortune Sejuani. Jaw Hunters is almost entirely going to be used on a Misfortune when it comes down, or possibly a Ruthless Raider. Those are actually pretty scary in this deck with the Overwhelm. You also can't peg off the Ruthless Raiders with Vile Feasts, and Vile Feast is crucial removal for you versus most other decks early on. Vile Feast is actually also good in the mirror match against other Jaw Hunters, so just something to keep in mind there as well. We do see the Sejuani come down. So one of the interactions I do want to kind of go over with Sejuani, and this is why Sejuani is pretty good against Deep usually, is that when she levels up, she has 7 health. And 7 health matters in other units as well. Like actually, Lee Sin is a uncommon 7 health as well. And I say uncommon because there's not a lot of champions that actually have 7 health, or more for that matter. So 7 health is outside of the range of a Devourer when it is deep. A deep Devourer is 7, and it's not going to be able to just naturally peg off a Sejuani. And it's kind of already hard to do that in this matchup on anything because of the potential of Elixir of Iron coming out, or Fury of the North to save a unit. And Fury of the North is definitely something you need to be playing around most of the game because of Overwhelm. At any moment, a Fury of the North can completely wreck your strategy. Now, another thing that can wreck your strategy that you just saw happen was Pilfered Goods. If you go deep, which I did, so my opponent did this correctly here. Pilfered Good Deep does, all right, let's start with Toss. Toss does not toss champions. So when you do go deep, you have a very high probability of drawing champions that are left in the deck, like Maokai Nautilus. Another way that this Sejuani deck can really go after you is Sejuani's leveled up freeze effect. It doesn't really matter how many big sea monsters you have on the field if every single turn they're getting frozen. Not much you can do about that. So Sejuani, generally speaking, has a pretty good matchup here. Riptide Rex is a card that is not very good for Sejuani in this matchup. Riptide Rex is generally not going to kill too much on your board, as you just saw there, because your units are too big. It's just going to be very difficult. There's the Fury of the North I was talking about earlier on the Devourer. So you just, and there actually is the freeze as well with the warning shot. So knowing these things, knowing that they can completely take your strategy, knowing that you can basically have your units frozen every turn and not be able to do anything, which means eventually your opponent's going to get damaged through. One of the things you do probably have to play to, especially if you already have a Nautilus in your hand, is Atrocity. Atrocity is the one thing that will likely be able to kill your opponent. the other issue with Atrocity, and again, this is why the Sejuani is so strong against this matchup, is the possibility of you playing the Atrocity and your opponent either having a warning shot or anything else really that will be able to proc Sejuani's freeze effect, turning your creature, your follower's attack to 0, and it does nada. So I actually did play the Atrocity there, just so you're aware, because I pretty much read that my opponent did not have any freeze effects there. They wouldn't have played the Keel Breaker if they had freeze effects. They would have just frozen the board and then done damage with attacks. They must have felt like they needed the Keel Breaker to survive there. So just something to think about. It is a little easy, or I don't want to say easy, but it is possible to read your opponent as to whether or not they have freeze in the Freljord matchup. That goes for the Ash Noxus matchup that there is typically now as well with something like Harsh Winds. Your opponent will routinely keep 6 mana open for Harsh Winds. But let's get into game number 2. This is versus They Who Endure. God, I can't talk today. I get the TH going on. All right. So this game does actually go a little bit longer. They Who Endure, obviously, we kind of have the Atrocity war going on. And you'll actually see this a little bit towards the end of the game. And I'll kind of point out the moments where I'm super concerned about Atrocity. And some of my draws are actually enable me to play around the Atrocity quite well towards the end of this game. So, Vile Feast on this 4-3 doesn't really feel that great. The fearsome units in They Who Endure, if they are doing the whole Mistwraith package, is very difficult to stave off with deep sea monsters. A lot of your stuff will not be able to block a level 1 Maokai, or a level 2 for that matter. Dredgers, really you're only relying on Deadbloom Wanderer. So I do actually draw the Deadbloom Wanderer here, and I do have a Jettison, and I do have Sap Magic in my hand. So it's something to note that Sap Magic, or Maokai, when you have a second one, does turn into Sap Magic, and it's actually quite useful to get 3 more towards your toss, or towards your deep, I should say, 3 more toss towards your deep, which can definitely expedite that deep process a little bit, especially when you have something like a Jettison in your hand. The Deadbloom Wanderer that I drew is also crucial for a few different reasons, and this is why Mist Call is really in this deck now. They Who Endure spiders, or it's not spiders anymore. Wow, I'm so used to saying spiders. They Who Endure, just in general, any deck really that's playing They Who Endure. Usually it's Callista package now. Sometimes it's not the fearsome package with these Mistwraiths. This one is the Mistwraiths. You are going to need, no matter what They Who Endure matchup, lifesteal and a way to stave off aggression. They are inherently an aggressive deck, and they look to finish you off with an Atrocity on a They Who Endure. Now, Deadbloom Wanderer obviously solves that problem. It's not only a lifesteal follower, but it also is 3 attack, which is huge in being able to block Callista, being able to block the Mistwraiths. Now, Mist Call, you always, especially because we have one in hand right now, right? You always, for the most part, there's probably some other situations where you just got to do what you got to do, like, reviving the strongest monster. You want to try to guarantee yourself a Deadbloom revival. So one of the things I've noticed with Mist Call, and one of the downsides to it, I guess, in being in these decks, which is definitely why I don't want to put it at 3 and I have 2 in here, is A, obviously it can be dead in the beginning of the game, but B, it's kind of difficult to get off on what you want to get it off on because of the saplings. You're pretty routinely, especially in this situation because we had to play the Maokai early, we pretty routinely are going to be having saplings on the field that are going to die. So you can see here, I'm going back and forth as to whether or not I want to block with this sapling even. Like, I'm considering actually not blocking with the sapling so that I can revive something else that's not the sapling and increase my odds. I do decide to block here. Thankfully, one of the good interactions for us, bad interaction for the Callista, is that usually you can just block the Callista and her summoned ephemeral unit. I almost just said ethereal. Wow. And her summoned ephemeral unit just with 1 blocker. So obviously the Callista won't die, which kind of sucks, but we'll be able to deal with it. That's 1 turn that we're able to stave off the aggression. And here's the Sap Magic. So what I'm doing, and this is something that you always want to be aware of, is when are you going to go deep? I knew as of last turn when my opponent was attacking, I counted everything up in my hand, what was going on. I knew that the Sap Magic plus summoning a follower on the board was going to get me to go deep. So now I have this 6/6 on board, which is also elusive, which is just huge in this matchup because they really have no way of getting rid of it. If you are able to get that down earlier, that is something I do want to mention here, that the elusive units are super important in a lot of matchups, even the mirror matchup. Even though your opponent is also going to have Abyssal Eye in the mirror matchup, if you get it down before they do, like if you have 2 on the board before they do, they're going to have a severely hard time trying to get it off the board, especially if they're not playing Grasp when it is before it is deep at 3/3. So this is definitely going to help us out here now. I am able to get the missed call off on the guaranteed Deadbloom Wanderer, which in this case, and just another thing to note is when Deadbloom Wanderer is summoned, it's not a play effect. It's when it's summoned, you're getting the 3 toss again. So just another reason why it's so good with missed call. That one was able to allow my Maokai to level up and go ahead now to start to put my opponent on a clock. So now the good thing about Maokai leveling up as early as possible in this matchup is that there's a good shot that Atrocity gets milled, which is huge, and obviously also other They Who Endures. Unfortunately, my opponent already had They Who Endure on the field, but at this point, I am constantly playing around Atrocity. Like, you have to assume, no matter what in this matchup, when your opponent has, 5 attack, 9 attack units on the board, that they have an Atrocity. So I need to be very careful about my health here. The other thing with the miss rates is that they do continue to buff themselves up, which is one reason why miss rates are good in the They Who Endure matchup. So now all of a sudden they're 5 attacks. So now I need to be careful. Like, okay, if I do take damage, I can't really afford to go to 5 health. I also don't have any heal in my hand, so I could go to something like 5 health if I did have a Vile Feast in my hand right now, right? There's also the option for my opponent to summon another Mist Wraith, and now they're at 6, so now I can't really go below 6 health. So lots of things going on here. I'm not sure, honestly, if my opponent should have attacked with the They Who Endure, especially if they didn't have a Atrocity in hand. So the way that my opponent attacked, because they attacked with They Who Endure, it actually does force me to block it and take more damage. Now, I'm okay with that because they did not have 6 mana for Atrocity that turn. So I know that I'm getting rid of the most possible damage dealing through Atrocity in their They Who Endure, so I'm comfortable with that. Now I draw this Vile Feast, so now I know, okay, if they Atrocity the Mistwraith and they Atrocity the Callista, I have Vile Feast to get past it. So I'm pretty okay with playing whatever from my hand. I do decide to get the Nautilus on the field because the Nautilus will decrease your Abyssal Eye cost, and that's something that you also definitely always have to keep an eye on. If you have a bunch of high-cost sea monsters in your hand, it's probably a good idea to try to get Nautilus out ASAP. Another amazing interaction with Nautilus is when you have a second one in your hand, and it becomes a Nautilus's Riptide. Nautilus's Riptide also is going to negate something like an Atrocity out of They Who Endure. It's absolutely insane how many times in competitive play, in Duels of Runeterra or Jamfest, I've seen that card completely wreck the opponent's strategy. So I'm still a little scared here, right? Because now, with my opponent summoning the other Wraithcaller, I only had the Vile Feast. So they had the 6 attack Atrocity. Drawing that Grasp, now I just feel, now I'm just good. Now I'm just 100% okay. They have to have They Who Endure and Atrocity. It's highly unlikely with only the 4 cards left that they ever get that. So they're kind of just relying on attacking. This is definitely a pretty big turn for them to attack. But obviously they're not aware that I have the Vile Feast in hand. So I'm able to actually set up the blocks here and stave this off. But always, always, always when you're playing against They Who Endure, and this is just recommended for any matchup, not just Sea Monsters versus They Who Endure, you just have to assume every single turn, if they have mana, they're going to have They Who Endure. They're also going to have Atrocity. And as long as you are playing around that for most of the game, you will be sure to be able to take home a victory. All right, and that's all she wrote. I hope that helped you guys kind of get a little bit more knowledgeable on just sea monsters in general. That's a very basic overview, right? Like I went through 2 of my games. I do think that in watching a lot of competitive play with sea monsters, there are a lot more intricate things to take into consideration. I might, possibly do a more advanced video. So I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say about the kind of content that I should put out. So in the comments below, let me know if you'd like to see some more advanced gameplay videos. And I mean stuff like passing priority, you know, maybe some psychology of it, hand reading, you know, stuff like that. Just more advanced stuff as to how to play different archetypes, or maybe just generalized stuff. So let me know in the comments below what you guys want. But until next time, as always, everybody stay healthy, stay positive. I hope shit just works for you.